Good morning to you. Thank you for starting your week out here and studying with us as we continue to go through the Psalms. If you want to grab a Bible and turn to the 35th Psalm, and while you're doing that, let me take just a minute. I've talked about it a little bit, and I just where we left off Saturday, I want to speak a little bit more about imprecatory Psalms. And we may or may not get to our text today, but I feel like it's important. Again, and I've talked about it a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit more about the understanding of imprecatory Psalms. We were Saturday looking at a passage, and David prays, "Let them be confounded and put to shame. Let them be like chaff blown to the wind. Let their way, their path, their road be dark and slippery. Let the angel of the Lord persecute them." And that's, again, as we've talked about, that's harsh. That's some pretty strong language. And I think for many Christians, it goes against what we believe. And who we are taught to believe, or how we're taught to believe, and how we believe Christians should act. Many times, if Christians take much of a stance on any issue at all, we're confronted and told that we're supposed to love one another. And you'll see as we go through the Psalms, this one's actually kind of mild compared to a couple of them that we read there. And then there's other places in other texts, not just in the Psalms, where we have this kind of an idea. We have these even in the Old Testament passages. It says, for example, in Leviticus, "Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart." And so how do we reconcile David praying these types of prayers and the Christian thought being godly? How do we reconcile that? Well, let me again address it a little bit further and give credit to John Phillips and a few others this morning as talk a little bit more about these imprecatory passages. When you look at them, obviously people, first thing they do is they question and they point out that doesn't sound much like God, that you would pray that somebody be confounded and put to shame and their way be dark and slippery. And so how some people would kind of balance this is that this is not what God would want. This is the heart of man. This is the unjust heart of man praying something like this. Others take and basically flip the whole psalm around and will say that these are the words of the ungodly against the godly. And so the psalmist is just repeating the words that have been said against him. Others take these psalms and say they're not even, they make them prophetic. That all this imprecatory shame, judgment, punishment, that all of that is for the future when God ultimately judges man. Others say this all goes back to the Old Testament and it doesn't have anything to do with grace at all. No, it doesn't sound like New Testament grace because it's not New Testament grace. It's Old Testament law. And so that's an explanation for it. Some basically, I guess the way to put it would say that the psalmist is justified based on what, for example, what David's going through here, that he has every right to pray for such a judgment on people. And it kind of, the idea is that it represents the way the Jews would look at things, that they were God's people, and so if you were against them, you were against God, and so it was okay to pray for God to destroy them. And so those are just some of the thoughts about why, how we justify, or how we can balance in the same book that says love your neighbor, to love others as yourself, all those passages, how we can turn around and have these kind of passages in the same book. Well, there's probably some measure of truth to every one of those explanations. They do have some, in many cases, they do have some prophetic meaning. David was somewhat justified in praying that these soldiers would be punished. It is a desire for righteousness that David is. All these things do have some level of truth to them, but here we have David, I think, who we know is a good man, a man the Bible says was after David's own heart, or after God's own heart, praying that his enemies be distressed, confounded, confused. And he says to us that would be justice. Look what he says in verse 7, "For without cause they have hid from me their net in a pit, which without cause they have digged for my souls." And so David is saying, telling us why he's praying those things. He's saying that it's right. They would reap what they were sowing. They had slandered his name. They had tried to attack him and overcome him, even though they had previously been his friend and served alongside of him in battle. And so David, I think he says, this is why. That, because they've, for without cause, here's what he says. He says, let them be confounded, let them be turned back, brought to confusion, let them be as chaff, let their way be dark and slippery, let the angel of the Lord persecute them, for without cause, or because for no reason they have hid from me their net in a pit, and without cause they have digged for my soul. And David says, this is why I'm praying for these things, is because of what they have done for me. Now, David ultimately is going to end up being on the receiving end of that kind of judgment because of his sin with Bathsheba. But David lays out his cause here in this. In this psalm, David is simply praying that his enemies would get what they were giving him. That they were pursuing him, let them be pursued. They were after him, let them be persecuted. Would Jesus have prayed that prayer? Is I guess the question for us in the New Testament, and I have to be honest and say, probably not. But we are talking about a man, David, who lived some 1,500 years before Jesus ever came along and gave his teachings. David was, I guess the best way to say it is, David was doing what he knew to be right at the time. Would David have prayed that prayer? after having walked and talked and heard the teachings of Jesus? I don't know. But I said, again, we're talking about a whole different time and a different nature. Should we, the better question is not should David have prayed that question, or would Jesus have prayed that prayer? But I think the question for us is, should we pray that question or pray that prayer? And I think when we take and we look at the teaching of the New Testament, we'd say that's not a New Testament prayer. That's not the way that Jesus would teach us to pray now that the New Testament has been revealed. And so how we treat and how we pray about our enemies, we have more light than David did. And so David was praying, I think, the prayer of the time. What he knew to pray, how he knew to pray. But you and I can't use David as our model. We use Jesus Christ as our model. And he tells us to love our enemies. And that was said long after David. And so I just wanted to take a little time this morning, and obviously we're not going to get into the text because of the time, but that question has been brought up, and it always is. If you've been wondering that, you're in the majority. Most people, when they first get introduced to the idea of imprecatory Psalms, struggle with that idea some, that we actually have people in the Bible praying for others' destruction. But again, we see that is an Old Testament prayer before we have the example of Jesus Christ and his teaching in the New Testament. So I hope that helps answer your question, and I hope that helps you to pray for your enemies. That you won't pray for fire to come onto their head, or for them for their way to be dark and slippery, or for them to be turned back and brought to confusion, but that we would pray blessings on even our enemies, like Jesus would have done. All right, have a great day, and bless those that curse you. And pray for those that would hurt you. All right, have a great day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning.